Rain swept across the Portland skyline, painting silver streaks over the city lights. It was one of those evenings that felt heavier than it should, the kind that made time slow down, the kind that made memories louder. Emma sat by the window of her small apartment, her fingers tracing patterns on the fogged glass. She'd moved here 6 months ago, chasing a new chapter after ending a long relationship and leaving behind a life that had become too predictable. Portland was supposed to be her clean slate, a place to heal, to rediscover herself, to breathe again. But lately, she wondered if starting over just meant learning to be lonely in a new place. Her apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rumble of thunder. The walls were bare, save for a few framed photos, her parents, her dog back home. A picture of the ocean she used to visit when she needed peace. Everything felt temporary, as if she hadn't yet decided whether this new life truly belonged to her. Emma stretched, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and decided to take a shower before bed. It was a small, comfort hot water steam, the sound of rain mixing with the shower spray. She gathered her things half-heartedly, humming a tune she couldn't remember the words to. The bathroom light flickered for a second before settling into a soft glow. The mirror caught her reflection-tired eyes, a faint smile, someone trying her best. As the water warmed, she stepped inside, letting the heat wash away the day. The sound was calming, a steady rhythm that matched the rain outside. For the first time all week, her shoulders began to relax. She closed her eyes, trying not to think, just feel. The rush of water filled her ears, muting the city, muting the noise inside her chest. But halfway through, she froze. Her eyes opened. The towel. She'd left it tag-and-folded neatly on the couch. A soft groan escaped her lips. She pressed her hands to her face, laughing quietly to herself. Of course, this was so her. She'd done this more times than she could count, especially when she lived alone. But tonight, she wasn't exactly alone. Because next door, just through the thin wall, was Ryan. Ryan had moved into the building 2 months after she did. They'd met in the hallway when she accidentally received one of his mail packages. He had that easy kind of charm, the kind that didn't try too hard. He'd thanked her, joked about owing her a coffee, and to her surprise followed through on it. Since then, they'd shared a few dinners, a few movie nights, small conversations that carried a surprising amount of warmth. He was calm, grounded, a little mysterious in the way quiet people often are. They weren't dating. Not exactly. But there was something there. Something slow, careful, unspoken. Now, dripping wet, standing in the middle of the steaming bathroom, Emma debated her options. She could run out quickly and grab the towel herself, risking cold floors and awkward encounters, or she could ask him. She bit her lip, shaking her head. No way, she muttered to herself. That would be ridiculous, embarrassing. But then again, he had the spare key. He'd helped her once when her sink had flooded, and she never took the key back. If she just called out, her thoughts tangled. Her heart thudded softly, not from panic, but from something else, something fluttery, unfamiliar. Maybe it wasn't about the towel at all. Maybe it was about the quiet loneliness that had been clinging to her lately, the kind that made her crave a voice. Any voice, just to remind her she wasn't entirely alone. The rain outside thickened again, tapping harder against the windows. The air in the bathroom fogged up, blurring her reflection. She sighed, laughing under her breath. Of course, Emma, she whispered. You'd forget something simple on a night like this? She turned off the water and stood still for a moment, listening to the storm. It felt strange how the world could be so loud and so silent at the same time. Somewhere deep down, she felt that the night was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She cracked the bathroom door slightly, letting a rush of cool air spill in. Steam rolled out into the hallway, curling around the faint yellow light from the living room lamp. Her apartment smelled like rain and coffee and faint traces of laundry detergent. She could see the towel folded neatly on the couch just a few steps away. And yet impossibly far when you're standing with nothing but courage and hesitation. And then she heard movement, soft footsteps from outside her door. Ryan's voice carried faintly through the wall. He was probably making tea again. He did that every night, even when it was late. She smiled. Somehow, the idea that he was just a few feet away made her feel safe. She hesitated again, her hand on the edge of the door. Maybe she could just call out, just once, it wouldn't be a big deal. They were friends, right? Her heart raced faster than it should have for something so simple. It wasn't about the towel anymore. It was about the warmth she missed. The closeness she hadn't let herself feel in months. Finally, she took a small breath and whispered, "Ryan?" No answer at first. The sound of rain filled the pause. Then, after a second, yeah. His voice came from the other side of the living room, curious, gentle. She hesitated, her cheeks warming, even though no one could see her. I forgot my towel." There was silence for a heartbeat. Then a small laugh, warm kind, a little amused. "You want me to grab it?" She nodded instinctively before realizing he couldn't see her. "Yes, please," she said softly. The moments that followed felt stretched thin. She heard his footsteps, the rustle of fabric, then the quiet knock at the door. "Got it," he said. She opened the door just a little, just enough for a hand to reach through the misty air. Their fingers brushed for a second as she took the towel. That tiny touch sent a spark she couldn't name through her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No problem," he replied, but there was something in his tones, something that lingered, like warmth that refused to fade. The door closed softly. Steam filled the room again. Emma stood there for a moment, towel in hand, smiling to herself. The air still hummed from that brief contact. Something small, maybe even silly, had shifted. When she stepped out of the bathroom a few minutes later, she caught sight of Ryan's mug on the counter. He must have left it earlier when he'd stopped by to return her charger. The faintest trace of his cologne still lingered in the air. She smiled again, quietly, feeling a little lighter. Maybe this city didn't feel like home yet. Maybe she was still learning how to start over. But tonight, in the soft rhythm of rain and the warmth of a borrowed towel, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. And she couldn't help but wonder if forgetting that towel was more than just an accident. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something she didn't know she'd been waiting for. The rain had turned soft by the time Ryan heard her voice. At first, he thought he imagined it a faint sound carried over the hum of the storm. He was sitting on the couch, half focused on a book he wasn't really reading. When her voice came again, barely above a whisper, "Ryan," he frowned, setting the book aside. "Emma," he called back. No answer, just the faint hiss of running water and the low rumble of thunder outside. He stood, listening. Then, clearer this time, he heard her again, hesitant, almost shy. "I forgot my towel." For a second, he just stood there, staring at the wall between their apartments. It was such a small, ordinary moment, but it felt strangely intimate. He could hear the faint splash of water through the half-open door, smell the faint scent of lavender soap in the air. He smiled without meaning to. He walked toward the bathroom door, pausing just before it. "You want me to grab it?" he asked, voice light, careful not to sound amused, even though the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "Yes." "Please," came her soft reply. He glanced around the living room and spotted the folded towel on the couch, exactly where she'd left it earlier. He picked it up, feeling the warmth from the dryer still trapped in the fabric. Somehow that tiny detail made him pause. There was something comforting about it, something human, tender, ordinary in the best possible way. He knocked lightly on the bathroom door. Steam rolled out as the door opened a crack. Her hand appeared, small and pale, against the white doorframe. He passed the towel through, their fingers brushing for only a second, but that second felt like something electric, something that stayed in the air long after. "Thank you," she said softly, voice quiet and sincere. "Any time," he replied. He wanted to say something else, something funny maybe, to break the awkwardness, but words didn't come. The door closed gently, leaving him alone in the hallway, with the faint sound of the shower starting again. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck, wondering why his heart was beating faster than it should. It wasn't a big deal. Just a towel. Just a neighbor. Just Emma. But somehow, her voice, the way she said his name, The way she trusted him enough to ask Kit felt like more. Ryan walked back to the couch and sat down, staring at the towel's empty spot. He chuckled to himself. "You're overthinking," he muttered. Still, he couldn't help it. Something about her had been quietly tugging at him since the day they met. The simple words made her look up. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, something passed between them, something quiet and honest. She smiled again, softer this time, and looked away. He could feel it in the air, the shift between comfort and connection, between what they were and what they might be. It was the kind of moment that doesn't need words to be understood. After a while, she sat on the couch, curling up with her mug of tea. He joined her, keeping just enough space between them to feel polite, but not distant. The sound of rain outside filled the silence. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly, like moving somewhere else, starting over again. He tilted his head. "You mean, like you did?" "Yeah," she said. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. I like it here, but some days it still doesn't feel like home." Ryan thought for a second before answering. "Maybe home isn't a place," he said quietly. "Maybe it's a person. Or a feeling." She looked at him again, her eyes soft, searching. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think we find home in small things. Like a voice that makes the day feel lighter. Or someone remembering how you take your tea." The rain outside slowed to a light drizzle. She smiled faintly, looking down at her mug, hiding the small tremble in her lips. "That sounds nice," she said. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence wasn't heavy, it was comfortable, like two people who didn't need to fill the air just to feel connected. The steam from her tea rose slowly, curling upward like the fog that had rolled from the bathroom earlier. Ryan watched her from the corner of his eye, noticing the way her fingers traced the rim of her mug absent-mindedly, the way her damp hair clung to her neck. He wasn't used to moments like this, the quiet, unplanned ones that made you feel more than you could explain. When she finally stood up, she gave him a grateful smile. "Thanks again. For the towel." He grinned, trying to play it cool. "Anytime. I'm your on-call towel guy now." She laughed, shaking her head as she walked toward her door. "Good night, Ryan. Good night, Emma." When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt strangely empty, like the warmth had left with her. He sat for a while, staring at the towel she'd folded neatly and left on the counter before leaving a quiet thank you without words. Outside, the last drops of rain tapped against the window, slow and steady. Ryan leaned back on the couch, smiling faintly. He didn't know what any of this meant yet, but he knew one thing: something had changed. A forgotten towel, a soft laugh, a quiet night. That's how it starts. Sometimes love, without grand gestures, without plans. Just two people in the middle of a storm, realizing that maybe, just maybe, they'd found a little bit of home in each other. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, and the air outside smelled of wet earth and pine. The city lights shimmered faintly through the mist, reflecting on Emma's window like distant stars. Inside, the world felt smaller, warm, quiet, and filled with the hum of unsaid things. Emma sat cross-legged on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, her damp hair falling over her shoulders. Ryan sat across from her, a mug of tea cradled in his hands. Neither of them had planned this moment, but somehow it felt natural. Like an evening that didn't need to be arranged, didn't just happen. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint tapping of rain against the window and the low hiss of the radiator. Emma glanced at him, catching the way the soft light played across his face. He looked relaxed, but there was a thoughtfulness in his eyes, like he was trying to figure something out without saying it aloud. She smiled faintly. "You always make tea when it rains." He looked up, returning her smile. "Old habit. My mom used to say tea fixes most things: sad days, long days, quiet ones. Does it work?" He shrugged, taking a sip. "Sometimes. It doesn't fix everything, but it helps you sit with it." She nodded, staring down at her own cup. "Yeah, I think I've been sitting with a lot lately." Ryan didn't press. He'd learned quickly that Emma wasn't someone you could rush. She talked when she was ready, and when she did, her words carried more meaning than most people's long stories. So he waited, giving her the space to find her voice. "I thought moving here would solve things," she said after a moment. "I wanted to start over, be someone new, forget all the noise I left behind." Her voice softened. "But sometimes it feels like I just changed the view, not the feeling." Ryan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You left because of someone, didn't you?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes lingered on the window, following the faint trail of rain running down the glass. "Yeah," she said finally. "Someone I thought I'd build forever with. But forever turned out to be shorter than I expected." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. The weight in her tone said enough. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She gave a small smile. "Don't be. I think I needed it. You don't realize how much of yourself you lose trying to keep someone else until they're gone." Ryan nodded, his chest tightening slightly. He wanted to tell her that she hadn't lost everything. She still carried light even when she didn't see it, but he stayed quiet. "Instead," he said, "maybe you didn't lose yourself. Maybe you just set her down for a while." That made her look at him. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the air between them felt still, like the world had paused just to make space for that single glance. Then she smiled, a real one this time, small but warm. "You always say things like that," she said softly. "Things that make sense but somehow feel like more." He chuckled. "Guess I've had a lot of practice being alone with my thoughts." "Do you like being alone?" she asked. He hesitated, thinking. "Sometimes it's peaceful, but sometimes it's just quiet. Too quiet." She understood that more than she wanted to admit. She looked down at her cup again, tracing the rim with her finger. "That's exactly it," she said. "It's not sadness, it's the silence that gets to you." A small silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The kind of silence that speaks without words. Outside, the drizzle turned to a steady mist, the sound gentle. Almost rhythmic. Emma stood and walked toward the window, pulling the curtain aside to look out. "The city looks different in the rain," she said. "Like everything slows down. Even the lights seem softer." Ryan joined her, standing close enough to feel the faint warmth from her shoulder. "Maybe that's why I like it," he said. "The world feels quieter, easier to breathe in." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You ever feel like you meet people at the exact moment you're supposed to?" He smiled, unsure if it was a question or a confession. "Maybe. Or maybe we only notice the timing when it feels right." Her eyes softened. "Yeah, maybe that's it." The rain tapped gently on the glass, and she turned back to the couch, pulling her blanket tighter around her. Ryan stayed standing for a moment, watching her, how she moved slowly. How her presence filled the room with something he couldn't name. He realized then that he didn't just like her company, he needed it. Not in a desperate way, but in that quiet, grounding way you need warmth after being cold for too long. When he sat back down, the air between them felt different, closer somehow. He noticed the way her fingers brushed against the edge of her mug. How her voice lowered when she spoke again. "You ever think about what it would be like to start over with someone new?" she asked. Ryan's throat tightened slightly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but starting over is hard. You don't know if you're ready, or if the other person is. You just hope you don't break something good by moving too fast." She looked at him quietly, as if those words landed deeper than he realized. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." For a moment, they both looked away. The sound of the rain filled the quiet again, gentle and steady. Then Emma said softly, "Maybe it's not about starting over. Maybe it's just about letting someone see the real you, even when you're still putting yourself back together." Ryan's chest tightened again. "That's brave," he said. She smiled faintly. "No, that's scary." He laughed under his breath. "Same thing sometimes." Her laugh joined his, soft but real, and for a few seconds, it was just the two of them, two people who'd been through different storms but somehow ended up under the same roof, sharing the same calm after the rain, eventually. She leaned back against the couch, her head resting on the cushion. Her voice was softer when she spoke next. "It's strange," she said. "I barely know you, but I feel like I can breathe when you're around." He felt his heartbeat quicken, though he kept his expression calm. "That's how I feel too," he said quietly. Like the noise quiets down. She didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the lamp. Then, as if afraid of what the moment meant, she smiled to change the subject. "You should open a tea shop. You'd make a fortune." He laughed, letting the moment soften. "Only if you promise to be my first customer." "Deal," she said, and the warmth in her voice lingered long after. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The rain outside had almost stopped, leaving only the sound of dripping water from the roof. The world felt still. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty any. What was full, rich, alive with what neither of them dared to name. And as Emma closed her eyes for a brief moment, listening to the soft rhythm of the night, she realized something simple but undeniable. Sometimes connection doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it comes quietly with tea, laughter, and the sound of rain. And somewhere between that quiet and the warmth beside her, she felt it hope. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't demand, just waits patiently to be seen. A few days passed since that quiet night. The rain had gone, replaced by clear skies and the kind of crisp air that hinted winter was close. The city moved on with its usual rhythm, buses sighing at stops, people rushing with coffee cups, and the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery. But for Emma, something felt different. The days seemed lighter, the silence less sharp. She still went to work, still walked home through the same streets. But there was a warmth following her now, like a thought she couldn't shake. Ryan had a way of staying in her mind even when he wasn't around. That Saturday morning, she woke to sunlight slipping through her blinds and the faint sound of someone knocking. She opened the door to find Ryan standing there, holding a brown paper bag and wearing a shy grin. "I made too much breakfast," he said. "Thought you might help me out." She laughed, brushing her hair from her face. "You mean you burned something and need backup?" "Guilty," he said, chuckling. "But the pancakes survived." She stepped aside to let him in, the smell of maple syrup already filling the air. It felt natural, like he'd always been part of her mornings. They set the food on the small kitchen table: pancakes, coffee, and a few scrambled eggs that looked better than he gave himself credit for. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, filled with teasing and small stories about childhood breakfasts and cooking disasters. There was no heaviness, no awkwardness, just laughter between bites. It amazed her how simple it felt being with him, how much she'd begun to look forward to these moments. After breakfast, Ryan noticed the small potted plant on her counter drooping. "You're supposed to water this, you know," he teased. She rolled her eyes. "I'm better with people than plants." "Lucky for the plant, I'm good at both," he said, grabbing a glass of water. She laughed, but something in his tone made her heart skip. He didn't seem to notice. He was too busy fussing over the little green leaves. When he turned back, she was watching him, his easy smile. The way the morning light caught the edge of his jaw, the calm in his eyes. She realized then that she didn't just feel comfortable around him, she felt safe. And that kind of safety was rare, especially after what she'd been through. They spent most of the morning together. He helped her rearrange a bookshelf that had been leaning awkwardly for weeks. And she introduced him to her favorite playlist, the one she only shared with people she trusted. Time moved gently, unhurried. When he finally stood to leave, she found herself not wanting him to. "Thanks for breakfast," she said softly at the door. He smiled. "Anytime. I'll bring the towel next time, just in case." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" "Not a chance," he said, his grin warm. Then he left, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and something harder to describe, a quiet presence that lingered long after the door closed. That evening, Emma curled up on the couch, thinking about how ordinary the day had been in, yet how much it meant. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it felt real. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a kind of happiness that didn't need fixing or explanation. The next week brought colder nights. One evening, a sudden knock pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened the door, Ryan stood there again, this time holding a grocery bag. "You mentioned you've been skipping dinner," he said simply. "So I thought I'd fix that." She blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said, stepping inside. They cooked together, laughing over the mess. They made flour on her sweater, pasta nearly boiling over, his attempt at chopping vegetables ending in uneven pieces. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. When they finally sat down to eat, the apartment was warm with the smell of garlic and the sound of soft jazz playing from her phone. As they ate, the conversation slowed. The laughter faded into something quieter, more thoughtful. "You ever think about how life just changes without asking you first?" she said. "You think you're standing still, and suddenly you're somewhere new." Ryan looked at her, his eyes steady. "Yeah, but sometimes where you end up is better than where you thought you were going." Oh. She smiled faintly. "You really think that?" "I do," he said. "I think sometimes we meet the right people at the wrong time. But if you're lucky, the time catches up." His words lingered in the space between them. She didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. Instead, she watched him, and he watched her. And in that silence, something unspoken passed through the air, something fragile but real. After dinner, they stood by the window, looking out at the street below. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement. Emma felt the urge to say something, anything, to hold on to the moment. "You make this place feel less empty," she said finally. He turned to her, a soft smile in his eyes. "You do the same for me." The words were simple, but they hit her deeply. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just looked at him, the quiet between them louder than anything else. Eventually, he broke the silence. "You know," he said lightly, "for someone who forgets towels, you're surprisingly unforgettable." She laughed, covering her face. "That's terrible," she said, but her smile gave her away. He grinned. "You'll remember it, though, fortunately," she said, still laughing. They stood there for a while, just talking about nothing, the kind of small, beautiful nothings that make life feel full. And when he finally left that night, the apartment didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it had been quietly filled with something new, something that didn't fade when the door closed. Later, when she was cleaning up, she noticed a small note tucked under one of the mugs he'd used. It was simple, written in his neat handwriting. "Sometimes the best things start with small accidents." She read it twice, then smiled to herself. Weeks passed, and the rhythm between them grew steadier. There were more dinners, more shared mornings, and long walks under gray skies. Nothing about it was rushed. They didn't label it, didn't force it, they just let it be. And one evening, as they sat together watching the city lights flicker on one by one, Emma thought back to that first night, to the sound of rain, the missing towel, and the quiet knock that had changed everything. Life had moved forward in the simplest, softest way. No grand confessions, no perfect moments, just a people learning to be in each other's worlds. Ryan looked at her then, eyes gentle. "Funny how it started, huh?" She smiled, resting her head against the back of the couch. "Yeah," she whispered. "All because I forgot a towel." He laughed, his voice warm. "Best mistake ever." She looked at him, the light from the window reflecting in her eyes, and said softly, "No, not a mistake. Just the universe giving me a second chance." Outside, the rain began again, steady and familiar. Inside, the warmth between them stayed quiet and certain. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't rush or demand. It shows up like a neighbor with breakfast, like laughter over burnt pancakes, like a towel passed through steam. And in that small apartment in Portland, Emma finally understood home wasn't a place. It was a person who stayed even when all you meant to do was take a shower and forgot the towel.